They said it was an accident. A missing American. A closed case. But decades later, buried evidence surfaced, proving the disappearance wasn't a tragedy, it was a decision. Someone knew the truth. Someone erased it. And the person who vanished was never supposed to survive. Before we begin, I need you to do 3 things right now. Subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications, because the story you're about to hear was buried for decades, and once you hear the ending, you'll understand why someone never wanted it told. This isn't just another true crime mystery. This is a case that rewrites what we think we know about loyalty, power, and who gets erased when the truth becomes inconvenient. Tonight's deep dive starts with a disappearance that was officially explained, neatly filed away, and quietly forgotten. A missing American. A closed investigation. A name written off as just another casualty. But years later, a discovery in an unexpected U.S. location cracked that story wide open, and what investigators found didn't just raise questions. It exposed a lie so dangerous that changing it would have destroyed reputations, careers, and entire institutions. What makes this case even more disturbing is the twist, a reversal of identity, gender, and motive that no one saw coming. The person at the center of this mystery was not who authorities said they were. And the role they played. It changes everything. Stay with me until the end, because the final chapter reveals a truth that forces one impossible question. Was justice ever the goal, or was silence the real objective? Let's begin. The case file was thin, too thin for a disappearance that supposedly destroyed an entire family. In 1989, the disappearance of Evan Calder, a 32-year-old private security contractor, was officially ruled an accidental death. His truck was found abandoned near a rural stretch of Red Rock Canyon, Nevada, keys still in the ignition, wallet on the seat. No body was ever recovered. Authorities concluded he'd wandered into the desert, disoriented, and succumbed to the heat. Case closed. But what never sat right was how fast it ended. No extended search. No forensic excavation. No follow-up interviews with co-workers who claimed Evan had been nervous in the weeks before he vanished. Within 10 days, the file was stamped deceased, and no further action. For nearly 30 years, Evan Calder existed only as a faded photo in a cardboard box, until a routine land survey for a new solar project unearthed something buried just 6 feet underground. Not bones. Not clothing. A sealed steel container. Inside were cassette tapes, falsified IDs, and a handwritten journal that didn't belong to Evan Calder at all. Because the handwriting belonged to a woman. And according to the dates inside that journal, Evan Calder was never the person who disappeared. The journal found inside the steel container was wrapped in plastic and duct tape, preserved with deliberate care. Every page told the same unsettling truth. Evan Calder never existed. The handwriting belonged to Marissa Hale, a name that appeared nowhere in Nevada records, birth registries, or missing persons databases. Yet the journal entries spanned over 15 years, documenting life lived under an assumed male identity. Marissa detailed voice training, forged employment histories, even notes about learning how men walk when they think no one's watching. She wasn't hiding from an abusive partner. She wasn't running from the law. She was hiding from something that was still looking for her. The tapes found alongside the journal made the story darker. On them, Marissa spoke calmly, methodically, explaining how she had been recruited in the late 1970s into a classified domestic surveillance program tied to private defense contractors operating on U.S. soil. When funding vanished, so did oversight, and so did people. She wrote about a transfer gone wrong. About witnessing an internal execution framed as an accident. And about the moment she realized she was no longer an asset, but a liability. Disappearing as a woman wasn't enough. So Marissa Hale became Evan Calder. And in 1989, someone finally caught up. Marissa Hale's journal never named the organization outright, but it didn't have to. She described a shadow network of private security firms, subcontracted by federal agencies during the Cold War's final years. These firms operated in legal gray zones, gathering intelligence on U.S. citizens suspected of leaking classified material, organizing protests near defense sites, or simply knowing too much. Marissa wasn't field muscle. She was an analyst, quiet, precise, forgettable by design. Her job was to track patterns, connect dots, flag anomalies. And one night in 1981, she flagged the wrong one. A fellow operative, another woman, was reported dead after a supposed training accident in Arizona. The internal memo said heat exhaustion. But Marissa had reviewed the surveillance logs. The footage timestamps didn't match. The incident report had been rewritten twice. When she questioned it, she was praised for her diligence and reassigned. That reassignment came with warnings disguised as concern. New handlers, unrecorded meetings, questions about her loyalty. She began copying files, hiding microcassettes, preparing an exit she never thought she'd need. By 1984, she understood the truth. The program didn't eliminate threats. It eliminated witnesses. And once you saw that, you never really left. By the time Marissa Hale became Evan Calder on paper, she already knew one thing for certain: disappearing once wouldn't be enough. Her journal described the first escape, leaving the program quietly, resigning under the excuse of burnout. It worked for 3 years, long enough for her to believe she'd slipped through the cracks. Then the calls started. No voices, just breathing. A dial tone. Clicks on the line when she spoke. Her apartment was entered while she was gone. Nothing stolen, everything rearranged just enough to be noticed. A warning. That's when she erased Marissa Hale. She forged a birth certificate from Ohio, obtained a social security number from a dead infant, and learned how to pass medical exams as a man. She cut her hair, bound her chest, and practiced silence. Evan Calder was designed to be invisible. Contract labor, no close relationships, cash-heavy jobs in isolated locations. 4 years it worked. Until 1989. That summer, Evan took a short-term security contract near Red Rock Canyon. The journal entries from that period became frantic. Mentions of being followed, unfamiliar vehicles, a man who asked questions he shouldn't have known to ask. The last entry ended mid-sentence, which meant someone interrupted her. And this time, she didn't get away clean. According to cassette tape recordings dated 2 days before her disappearance, Marissa believed she was being tested, forced to prove she could still be trusted. She described seeing a second vehicle parked far from the road, engine running. A man leaning against it, watching. She never described his face. Only his voice. Calm. Familiar. Like someone who already knew how this would end. The steel container found decades later wasn't a coffin, it was a contingency. Marissa had buried evidence, not herself. A final insurance policy in case she didn't survive the encounter. Which meant the desert didn't kill her. Someone made sure the story stopped there. The Land Survey team in 2018 had no idea what they'd uncovered. They were mapping soil stability for a federally approved solar expansion project. Routine work on land that had changed hands multiple times since the late 1980s. When the drilling equipment struck metal, supervisors assumed it was scrap. It wasn't. The steel container was airtight, welded shut, and deliberately buried below the frost line. No markings. No serial numbers. No record it had ever been placed there. Inside, investigators found 3 things that immediately halted construction: falsified federal IDs, cassette tapes labeled only by dates, and a journal signed not by Evan Calder, but by Marissa Hale. That discovery triggered jurisdictional chaos. Local authorities contacted federal agencies. Federal agencies denied ownership. Records that should have existed didn't. And within 48 hours, the site was placed under restricted access, not for environmental reasons, but national security concerns. That phrase appeared in no public report. A private firm was contracted to handle the materials. The tapes were classified. The journal was copied, then sealed. And the official conclusion quietly shifted. Evan Calder was no longer missing. He was reclassified as an intelligence-related fatality. But one investigator noticed something chilling. There was still no body, and no proof Marissa Hale ever died. Only one person listened to all the cassette tapes before they were locked away. A civilian audio analyst, brought in quietly, paid well, and instructed not to ask questions. Years later, in an off-the-record interview, that analyst revealed something investigators never documented. Marissa's voice changed. Early recordings were steady, controlled, almost clinical. She spoke like someone trained to detach from fear. But the final tape was different. Her voice was lower, slower, not from disguise, but exhaustion. And she wasn't alone. In the background of that last recording, there was another voice. Male. Come. Interrupting her mid-sentence. The analyst described it as practiced authority, someone used to being obeyed. Someone who didn't raise his voice because he never had to. What made it worse was this. The voice never identified itself. No threats. No demands. Just 3 words, spoken softly, clearly, and close to the microphone. You ran far enough. The tape cut out seconds later. No struggle. No gunshot. Just silence. Federal reports dismissed the voice as audio artifact interference. But the analyst knew better. They'd enhanced thousands of recordings. This was no distortion. It was a person. And whoever he was, he didn't need to kill Marissa Hale immediately. Because erasing her story was enough. The final twist didn't come from the tapes. It came from a name that surfaced years later in an entirely different place, Savannah, Georgia. In 1996, a woman named Elliot Rowan filed a quiet civil lawsuit against a dissolved private defense contractor for wrongful termination and identity theft. The case was sealed within weeks. No press. No ruling. Just a settlement and a lifetime non-disclosure agreement. On paper, Elliot Rowan was born male, raised in foster care, worked seasonal construction, and paid taxes under a clean Social Security number. But when a retired clerk later reviewed the sealed file, one detail stood out. Elliot Rowan's biometric markers, height loss, handwriting shifts, vocal range, matched patterns consistent with long-term identity masking. More disturbing was the psychological evaluation attached to the file. It referenced chronic hypervigilance following forced detainment, and survivor guilt linked to multiple deceased associates. There was also a handwritten note in the margin, never addressed in court. Subject previously presumed dead under another identity. Marissa Hale didn't die in the desert. She died on paper. And Evan Calder wasn't the final disguise. He was the middle one. By the time Elliot Rowan disappeared from public records in the early 2000s, every institution tied to Marissa Hale's story had already protected itself. The private contractor dissolved. The Federal Oversight Office restructured. Key personnel retired, relocated, or died. Documents were sealed under layered classifications, some expiring, others quietly renewed. When journalists later attempted to trace Evan Calder's disappearance, they hit the same wall every time, missing cross-references. Files existed, but never in the same place. Names didn't align. Dates drifted just enough to avoid confirmation. It wasn't sloppy. It was engineered. What made the cover-up effective wasn't force, it was patience. By allowing time to pass, witnesses aged out. Families stopped asking questions. Public interest moved on. And by the time the truth surfaced, it looked too complicated to explain in a headline. But one internal memo, leaked anonymously in 2019, summed it up in a single line. Operational silence was maintained through attrition, not suppression. No one had to be threatened anymore. The truth simply had no place left to land. Except one. A YouTube channel willing to say the names out loud. By the time Elliot Rowan vanished from public records in the early 2000s, every institution connected to Marissa Hale's disappearance had already insulated itself. The private defense contractor dissolved quietly. Oversight agencies rebranded. Supervisors retired, relocated, or passed away. Documents were sealed under overlapping classifications, some scheduled to expire, others quietly extended without explanation. When journalists later tried to trace Evan Calder's case, they encountered the same obstruction again and again. records that technically existed but never aligned. Names appeared in one database but not another. Dates shifted by weeks. Cross-references led to dead ends. This wasn't incompetence. It was design. The strength of the cover-up wasn't intimidation, it was time. Witnesses aged. Families stopped pushing. Curiosity faded. By the time fragments of the truth resurfaced, the story was too complex, too old, too uncomfortable to summarize. One leaked internal memo from 2019 revealed the strategy in chilling clarity. Operational silence was maintained through attrition, not suppression. No one needed to be silenced anymore, because the system had learned how to outlive the truth. All except one place where it could still be spoken. When investigators finally compared all three identities, Marissa Hale, Evan Calder, and Elliot Rowan, the conclusion was unavoidable. One person had survived a system designed to erase her. Marissa Hale didn't win. She endured. Each identity was a shield, each disappearance a calculated retreat. She sacrificed her name, her gender, her past, everything that could be used to track her. But survival came at a cost. Medical records tied to Elliot Rowan revealed chronic stress disorders, untreated injuries, and long-term isolation. No family. No close friends. No photographs after 2003. It was as if she slowly erased herself on her own terms. The final record connected to Elliot Rowan was a handwritten affidavit sealed in a county clerk's office, never filed, never submitted. Just stored. It contained one sentence. I stayed alive long enough for the truth to exist. No accusation. No demand for justice. Just proof. Because exposing the lie wasn't about revenge, it was about preventing silence from winning again. And now, decades later, that silence has been broken. If this story unsettled you, it should. Because what happened to Marissa Hale wasn't the result of one bad decision. It was the outcome of a system that decided some truths were too dangerous to survive. This case forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. How many stories like this never reached the surface because time did its job too well? If you believe stories like this deserve daylight, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this isn't just entertainment, it's accountability. Subscribe to the channel if you want more deep dives into cases that powerful people hoped would stay buried. And turn on notifications, because the next story goes even deeper. Most importantly, share this video. Silence only works when stories stop spreading. Drop a comment below. Do you think Marissa's survival was justice, or just another form of exile? And if you want a follow-up episode breaking down the real-world parallels to this case, let me know. Until next time, remember, the truth doesn't disappear. It waits.